One of the great recurring Australian dreams, along with bringing water from the coast to the arid inland, has been the vision of a lush northern food bowl to rival or even replace the Murray-Darling Basin. That vision came into focus again as the Murray-Darling's water and other environmental problems have compounded over the past decade, threatening devastation. But the hopes of those promoting the dream have been shattered in the past week after a federal government commissioned report found that arguments for a vast development of northern Australia harnessing seasonal monsoonal deluges are, quote, not supported by the evidence. So the flak has been flying around the country and in Canberra with claims of political foul play and calls for a further Senate inquiry. And in the thick of the fray, loud amongst the protesting voices, there is a distinctive old Texan twang. Greg Hoy reports.
Where is Australia going to be in 50 to 80 years' time? We've got a serious problem, and I have to say that if we don't develop the north, someone eventually will come and do it for us.
We don't want to do to Northern Australia what we have done to the Murray-Darling. The science says, be careful.
Well, it's flooding down in Texas.
You'll notice a strong Texan twang amidst the fierce debate over the future of the $137 billion a year Australian agricultural industry.
The Texans think big, and I'm proud of that.
When 84-year-old irrigation expert Jack Fletcher emigrated down under from Texas 45 years ago, he saw a vision splendid, as big as Texas itself, larger than the United Kingdom, the vast Kimberley district, with its sprawling river plains fed by the monsoonal rains across Australia's far northwest, where Jack Fletcher fell in love with the Fitzroy River in the western Kimberley.
Right now there's 1 billion people in this world going to bed hungry. And here we've got the Kimberley with fantastic groundwater and underground water resources, soils better than the Rio Grande Valley of Texas.
Mobile 1 to Mobile 10.
Back in the 1960s, encouraged by locals like John Lewis, the then government engineer who would design the dams for the Ord River irrigation scheme in the east of the Kimberley, Texan Jack Fletcher defied the sceptics, raised international finance and established the Australian Land and Cattle Company along the mighty Fitzroy River.
The Australian Land and Cattle Company, ALCO, is forging ahead.
Jack proved the way to a lot of people. It's now known that the amount of irrigable land along the Fitzroy River is enormous, certainly bigger than the Ord.
At its peak, the company was colossal, combining 7 Kimberley cattle stations, 100,000 cattle for export, crop irrigation twice the size of the Ord River scheme. But there were 2 great setbacks. First, a massive flood destroyed a government-designed flood levee bank. Second, Jack Fletcher's attempts to rebuild met with growing anti-American sentiment.
And I looked over the hill there, and here come Brian Burke and his bandits. And he wanted the Yanks out of the Kimberleys.
But in the East Kimberley, John Lewis's dams were approved on the Ord River, eventually creating 14,000 hectares of irrigation land, with the state and federal funded Ord Stage 2 soon set to deliver almost double that irrigation area.
The people in Canberra, CSIRO, they were always opposed to the Ord River, absolutely opposed to it. Nothing you could do was right, but get in and build the thing. And if you ask them, would you like us to return that dam to nature, to drain it? They say, oh, goodness, no, it's part of our heritage.
Both these men have joined the protest against a recent report by the federal government-appointed Northern Land and Water Task Force, outlining a sustainable development plan for the 3 states of Australia's north, which now receive 8.5 times the runoff of the increasingly drought-affected Murray-Darling Basin. But citing research by the CSIRO, the report states the potential for Northern Australia to become a food bowl is not supported by evidence. And later, there are also limits to available water and suitable agricultural soils.
Well, that's wrong. That's wrong. The CSIRO has been wrong so many times.
There were some who thought that the Land and Water Task Force would produce designs and plans for another 10 Ord systems through the entire of Northern Australia, without taking into account that in the last 20 years we haven't been building such systems, without taking into account that in fact the terms of reference for the inquiry did not ask it to identify locations for dams.
People hungry for land and water, particularly from southern Australia, but also from abroad, such as places like Texas, move here, want to create a new agricultural ideal. And unfortunately, the realities of intermittent water availability, poor soils, long distance to markets, pests and diseases have often beset various agricultural projects, many of which have failed.
Freshwater ecologist and conservationist Dr. Stuart Blanche was one of 14 members of the task force which sought to strike a balance between Indigenous, scientific, agricultural and tourism concerns.
We all on the task force realise that we don't want to simply rehash an old 19th century vision.
But the former chairman of the Northern Task Force under the Howard government, Senator Bill Heffernan, is calling for a Senate inquiry into the findings of the task force, which was reorganised by the Rudd government.
You've got more academics, and the academics often just take to sipping wine and thinking about retirement to the coast. I mean, this ought to be about where Australia is going to be in 50 to 80 years' time. What are the challenges, given that the global the prediction on the science for the planet is that in 50 years' time there'll be 9 billion people, there'll be 1 billion people unable to feed themselves.
Senator Heffernan was removed from the task force by the Rudd government's Parliamentary Secretary for North and Western Australia, Gary Gray.
The task force membership that we inherited in 2007 was the task force that Senator Heffernan had put together. What we did was we removed the politicians. The report is in fact very positive about growth of the future economy of Northern Australia.
The task force has suggested there is scope to increase growth in irrigable areas in the north by between 20 to 40,000 hectares, but many were hoping for far more, and they still are. In fact, there seems to be differing views within the task force itself as to how much more of a growth opportunity remains. Also represented on the task force, the National Farmers Federation.
CSIRO did a lot of the groundwork on water and soils availability. What they've come up with is saying that there's not a lot of data on surface water, on stream flows, not a lot of data on the interconnectivity of underground water with surface water. So they've recommended, and the task force has recommended, a fairly cautious approach. But I think what we need to do is get on with the job, because I think there are vast areas of good soils. There is available water, and what we need to do is prove it up and untap the opportunities.
Despite the drought, the highly efficient Australian agricultural sector contributes around 12% of the nation's GDP. 65% of production is exported already, with growth opportunity commensurate with the ballooning projections for global population.
Food security is going to be an increasingly important issue, I think, going forward. We have a home population of about 22 million, we feed about 60 million, and we can do more.
There's a lot about this task force report that deserves careful consideration. It doesn't say there will never be more dams. It doesn't say there will never be more weirs. It doesn't say there will never be more catchment systems. That sort of approach, I think, is insightful.
Greg Hoy with that report.